In 1995, two researchers at the University of Mississippi filed a U.S. patent for something you can find in almost any Indian kitchen: turmeric. For centuries, Indian families have used it to treat wounds, infections, and inflammation. It was part of Ayurvedic medicine long before the word pharmaceutical even existed. But to the U.S. Patent Office, it was a new invention. That patent, numbered 5,401,504, granted exclusive rights to the use of turmeric powder for wound healing. It wasn't long before India pushed back. The Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, or CSIR, challenged the claim. They brought forward Sanskrit texts, medical treatises, even old village records, proving turmeric's ancient medicinal use. In 1997, the U.S. revoked the patent. It was a small victory, but a symbolic one, because it raised a question that hasn't gone away. Can you own nature? And who decides what counts as discovery? The ethics of intellectual property were built around one idea: that innovation deserves reward. But in the world of traditional medicine, that logic starts to unravel. For Indigenous and local communities, knowledge isn't individual, it's collective, passed down orally over generations. It evolves through observation, experience, and shared wisdom. Yet the global patent system, rooted in Western legal traditions, doesn't recognize that. To qualify for a patent, an idea has to be novel and involve an inventive step. So when corporations isolate an active compound from a plant long used in indigenous medicine, they often argue it's a new discovery. Vandana Shiva, an Indian scholar and environmental activist, calls this biopiracy, the ultimate colonization, stealing not land, but living knowledge. And she's not exaggerating. According to the World Intellectual Property Organization, fewer than 2% of patents involving genetic resources include any disclosure of indigenous contributions. In other words, the system that rewards innovation rarely recognizes where that innovation began. India saw this happen again with the neem tree, known for its powerful antibacterial and antifungal properties. For centuries, neem was used in Ayurvedic medicine and even as a natural pesticide. But in 1994, the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the chemical company W.R. Grace received a European patent for a neem-based pesticide. Indian farmers and environmental groups protested. They called it theft, the privatization of something that had always been communal. After a long legal battle, the Pseudo-European Patent Office revoked the patent in 2000, ruling that neem's medicinal use was croage wa nisirpchao, prior art. It wasn't new, it was just unacknowledged. But the controversy wasn't limited to India. Thousands of miles away, in the Amazon basin, another sacred plant became the center of a patent dispute: ayahuasca. For indigenous Amazonian communities, ayahuasca isn't just a plant, it's a living spirit. Used for centuries in spiritual and healing rituals, it represents connection to ancestry, to nature, and to the divine. In 1986, an American named Lauren Miller was granted a U.S. patent on a variety of the ayahuasca vine. To indigenous groups, this was blasphemous. The idea that anyone could own something so sacred. The Coordinadora de las Organizaciones Indígenas de la Cuenca Amazónica, or COICA, organized protests. Their statement read, "Our knowledge is collective. It cannot be owned by one person." After years of pressure, the U.S. Patent Office revoked the patent in 1999, but the damage was done. The incident exposed how easily Western law could override indigenous sovereignty. Part of the problem lies in the TRIPS Agreement, a World Trade Organization treaty that sets global standards for intellectual property. It was designed to protect inventors and corporations, but it never accounted for non-Western knowledge systems. That gap gave rise to what critics call the new colonialism, one that doesn't seize territory but genomes. In response, the Nagoya Protocol, adopted in 2010, created a framework for what's called Access and Benefit Sharing, or ABS. It requires anyone using genetic resources, plants, microorganisms, traditional compounds, to get prior informed consent from local communities and to share profits fairly. It was a step forward, but implementation has been slow and uneven. The United States still hasn't ratified the protocol, so while the law technically evolved, the imbalance of power didn't. Multinational pharmaceutical and biotech companies continue to extract knowledge from biodiversity-rich regions, often in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, while profits flow back to the global north. There are, however, moments of progress. In South Africa, the San people had used the hoodia cactus for centuries to suppress hunger during long hunts. In 1997, South Africa's Council for Scientific and Industrial Research patented the active ingredient, P57, and licensed it to Pfizer. When the San found out, they protested, arguing that their knowledge had been used without consent. After international backlash, CSIR signed an agreement with the San Council to share profits. It was one of the first major benefit-sharing precedents in the world. India also took lessons from its past. In 2001, it created the Traditional Knowledge Digital Library, or TKDL, a massive database cataloging over 200,000 formulations from Ayurveda, Unani, and Siddha medicine. When a foreign company tries to patent something that already exists in this database, India can now file instant legal objections. So far, TKDL has helped prevent or revoke over 200 wrongful patents worldwide, from turmeric to basmati rice. Still, activists argue that documentation alone isn't enough, because the deeper question isn't just who records knowledge, it's who controls it. Today, the issue has evolved beyond plants and herbs. With the rise of synthetic biology, genetic sequencing, and AI-based drug discovery, corporations are now mining massive digital databases of genetic material, sometimes derived from indigenous communities, without their consent. Researchers call it digital biopiracy. In 2023, a study in Nature Sustainability warned that without stronger oversight, AI tools could accelerate global bioprospecting, extracting genetic data faster than laws can regulate it. Meanwhile, Indigenous activists argue that even well-intentioned research often reproduces colonial patterns. Communities contribute biological and cultural resources, but rarely share in ownership, profit, or recognition. For decades, Indigenous communities have watched their ancestral knowledge get patented, sometimes by multinational corporations, sometimes even by universities. But slowly, that imbalance is beginning to shift. In May 2024, a breakthrough finally came. Member states of the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, adopted the WIPO Treaty on Intellectual Property, Genetic Resources, and Associated Traditional Knowledge, known as the GRATK Treaty. It's a landmark step, the first international treaty to directly address how genetic resources and traditional knowledge should be treated in patent law. Under this agreement, anyone filing a patent that involves a plant, genetic material, or knowledge derived from indigenous sources must disclose where it came from, and, crucially, who it came from. The goal is simple but long overdue: transparency and recognition. Patent applicants must name the country of origin and the indigenous peoples or local communities whose traditional knowledge contributed to their invention. If that information isn't known, they must declare it, a small but significant shift toward accountability. The treaty isn't perfect. Critics argue that disclosure alone doesn't ensure benefit sharing, that companies can still profit without truly compensating the communities that preserved this knowledge for centuries. Others worry that the treaty's enforcement mechanisms remain too weak. Some scholars suggest new models, community patents, collective licensing, or even open-source medicine, where benefits are distributed more equitably. But there's also a philosophical tension at play. Can the act of patenting ever be ethical if it rests on the idea of exclusivity, of ownership over something that's inherently communal and natural? Perhaps the answer lies not in more patents, but in redefining innovation itself, seeing it as collaboration, not extraction. When India challenged the turmeric patent in 1997, the case was about more than a spice. It was about reclaiming narrative. saying that wisdom doesn't need a laboratory to be legitimate. Patents were meant to reward creativity. But in a world where ancient traditions meet modern law, they can also erase the very people who made discovery possible.